Welcome back to America's Fractured Politics. As America faces yet another moment of reckoning with Donald Trump, the political question dominating every conversation isn't just what he'll do, it's how and whether we can actually stop him. We've been here before, but this time the stakes are heavier, the mood more exhausted, the guardrails more worn down, and the danger extreme. Removing Trump isn't simply about getting rid of one man in one office. It's really about testing whether any of our constitutional and political mechanisms still work under the intense gravitational pull of his cult-like influence. It's a stress test for the whole system, and when you lay out the options in front of us, you realize there's no clean escape hatch. Instead, there are several paths forward, each one risky in its own way, each one telling us something uncomfortable, but necessary, about our national resilience and our national fragility. Let's start with the one everybody knows by now, impeachment. On paper, impeachment looks almost elegant. It's the formal constitutional method to remove a president who abuses his power. You can point to the language in the Constitution. You can cite high crimes and misdemeanors. You can follow the steps. It's clean on paper. But once you turn the page from the Constitution to the actual Congress we have, things get messy very fast. We've already seen how this works. The House can gather evidence, hold hearings, draft articles, and vote to impeach. That's all within reach. But conviction in the Senate, that's the Everest. With Trump's loyalists still dominating large segments of the GOP, and with that network of state-level power and right-wing media infrastructure at his back, it is incredibly hard to imagine two-thirds of the Senate suddenly rediscovering their consciences. Another impeachment, if it fails, risks becoming just one more chapter in Trump's narrative of persecution. He'll turn it into content, into merchandise, into fuel. And yet there's a reason impeachment keeps coming back into the conversation. It remains the clearest constitutional statement that no man is above the law. Even when it fails, it leaves a mark. It says we saw what you did and we named it. Then there's the 25th Amendment, which always sounds at first blush like the nuclear option. It offers a more clinical legalistic route, declaring the president unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. But here's the catch. It's a tool designed for incapacity, not misconduct. It's meant for the heart attack, the coma, the sudden break from reality, not the slow, deliberate corrosion of democratic norms. That distinction matters a lot. For the cabinet and the vice president to invoke it, they'd have to cross a line they've never even approached. They'd have to admit that Trump is mentally or physically unfit to serve, and they'd have to do it in public, knowing that their political lives, their personal safety, and their standing in that movement would all be on the line. When you look at who fills those cabinet seats, people handpicked for loyalty first, competence second, the idea that they will suddenly turn into constitutional guardians feels optimistic at best. So in practice, the 25th Amendment lives more as a ghost than a plan. But even as a ghost, it has some power. The fact that people even whisper about it in Washington is a signal. It tells the country that there are, at least on paper, mechanisms for dealing for a president who has become a danger to stability. Those whispers, those discussions, remind us that the architecture of restraint exists, even if the people inside the building are too afraid to use it. So if the formal mechanisms are shaky, where does that leave the rest of us? It leaves us with people power. Outside formal governance, the power of ordinary citizens, organized, strategic, and yes, economic, remains very real. One idea that keeps surfacing, especially when institutional channels feel blocked, is the notion of a general strike aimed not just at Trump himself, but at his corporate sponsors and donors. Think about that for a moment. The companies that bankroll Trumpism don't survive on ideology. They survive on revenue, on us. They thrive on consumer complicity, on our attention, our purchases, our silence. A coordinated mass withdrawal of that complicity would send shockwaves through the economic system that props up his politics. You don't have to get every worker in America to walk off the job for this to matter. You just have to make it clear that openly funding authoritarianism carries a financial price. The hard part, obviously, is getting there. Strikes demand discipline. They demand organization, solidarity, and sacrifice. Those are rare commodities in a fragmented society where people are juggling two jobs, childcare, and a constant barrage of disinformation. It can feel like too much to ask. But history is brutally clear on this point. When money feels pain, power starts to move. That's the logic behind general strikes and boycotts. They translate moral outrage into economic pressure. Meanwhile, the most straightforward path, the one we like to tell ourselves is still the bedrock of this whole experiment, lies in the ballot box. Winning the November elections by overwhelming margins is the clearest route to boxing Trump in. If voters deliver a landslide against Trump-aligned Republicans, his administration loses something it desperately needs: congressional muscle and plausible political cover. Instead of a presidency acting in concert with a loyal legislature, you get a presidency walled in by opposition majorities. It's not removal, but it is containment. It's governance through obstruction, using the same tactics of gridlock that the right has used for years, but now in defense of democracy rather than against it. The strength of this strategy is legitimacy. It's hard to argue with the numbers. A decisive electoral defeat sends a message that can't be swatted away quite as easily. Trump's authoritarian program does not have majority support, but the weakness is time, and time under Trump is not neutral. Between now and that election, the country will live through months of executive aggression, sweeping orders, retaliatory actions, chaotic policy swings, and constant attempts to break what's left of the guardrails. Elections give us a chance to correct course, but they do not protect us in the meantime. Now imagine we get to that election and Democrats retake one or both chambers of Congress. Suddenly, impeachment comes back, but under very different lighting. With majority control, impeachment stops looking like a desperate gesture and starts looking like what it was supposed to be all along: a sober tool of constitutional stewardship. Articles could be crafted with more care, grounded in a growing record of abuses during Trump's return to office: the self-dealing, the retaliation, the defiance of oversight, the open contempt for the law, and the war. The timing would be different, too. Post-election impeachment would follow a public mandate, not precede it. It wouldn't be Congress racing ahead of the voters. It would be Congress catching up to them. That doesn't magically solve the polarization problem, of course. Trump's base will rage. The right-wing media ecosystem will declare war. But sometimes the function of an institution is not to avoid backlash. It's to absorb it in the service of something larger. A post-election impeachment process, even if it doesn't end in removal, could help reset expectations about what the presidency is and is not allowed to do. Alongside all of this, the judiciary remains another axis of resistance. Not a path to literally removing Trump from office, but a series of tools for hobbling his power. Courts are one of the last semi-independent institutions that can still put hard limits on executive overreach. We've seen this playbook before. Trump issues sweeping executive orders, travel bans, gag rules on agencies, moots against dissenters, targeted economic punishments, and within hours lawsuits are filed. State attorneys general, civil rights groups, unions, private citizens, they all head to court. Cases wind their way through district courts, appellate courts, sometimes up to the Supreme Court. None of this is fast. None of it is clean. But it matters for one simple reason. It slows the rhythm of authoritarianism. It forces impulsive acts to move at the speed of litigation instead of the speed of Twitter. Now there's a catch, and it's a serious one. Trump and his allies have spent years seeding the judiciary with loyalists who take a very flexible view of limits on presidential power. Some of those judges will go out of their way to greenlight whatever he wants to do. And yet, even in a captured judiciary, there are pockets of institutional self-respect. Judges who may agree with Trump ideologically can still bristle when a president tries to treat the courts as a rubber stamp. That tension can produce surprising rulings, narrow injunctions, procedural delays. None of that is glamorous, but in politics, sometimes delay is the best kind of victory you can get. Taken together, all these routes, impeachment, the 25th Amendment, general strikes, electoral landslides, post-election impeachment, and court challenges, reveal the fundamental tension we're living inside, the gap between what's lawful and what's possible. Impeachment is clearly lawful, but politically paralyzed. The 25th Amendment is clearly constitutional, but frozen in fear. Strikes are deeply democratic, but scattered and hard to sustain. Elections are clean and legitimate, but painfully slow. Post-election impeachment offers hope, but risks intensifying the very divisions we're trying to heal. Courts provide a shield, but it's a fragile shield, full of cracks and weak spots. No single one of these options can, on its own, save the republic. But that's not actually how republics are saved. It's saved by a messy combination of all of the above. Then there's the part we don't like to talk about, because it's not about tactics or institutions. It's about stamina, moral stamina. Each of these paths demands some level of faith. Faith in institutions that have already disappointed us, faith in organizing that often falls short, faith in truth in a culture that rewards lies. Trump's greatest weapon isn't his base or his money or his legal team. His greatest weapon is exhaustion. He floods the zone with so much chaos that people eventually tune out. They stop clicking, stop reading, stop voting, stop protesting. He doesn't have to win every fight if he can simply outlast everyone who opposes him. That means removal, or even containment, isn't just a structural project, it's a psychological one. It requires people to decide, consciously, that they're not going to let themselves be worn down into numbness. So resistance has to move beyond the walls of Congress and the steps of the Supreme Court. It has to happen in newsrooms, in classrooms, in union halls, in community organizations, and yes, in those corporate boardrooms where checks are written and decisions get made. Journalists who keep digging when the story feels repetitive. Educators who keep teaching democratic values in environments where those values are under siege. Workers who use their leverage to say, "We won't help you profit from dismantling our rights." Judges, even conservative ones, who draw a line and refuse to let the law become a joke. None of these people can remove Trump by themselves, but they can contain him, constrain him, and make sure the damage he does is not total. We are in a battle not just for policy, but for norms, for the idea that some things are out of bounds and that crossing those lines carries a cost. And in the end, that's really what this is about. It's not about choosing one magical path and riding it to victory. It's about understanding that every path, legal, social, electoral, economic, has to be used, often at the same time. The sum of many small acts of defiance, many strategic pushes, many institutional fights, is what forms the broader architecture of removal and restraint. If impeachment fails, the 25th Amendment conversation still signals unease at the highest levels. If that goes nowhere, elections are still coming. If courts cave in one case, they might push back in another. If corporations won't listen to polite letters, they might listen to a balance sheet in pain. The people are not just spectators to this process. They are ultimately both the wall that stands in the way and the weapon that can push back. The reality we're facing is stark. Every option for dealing with Trump carries real peril. Political, social, even physical. But inaction guarantees something worse. Inaction guarantees that the lesson future presidents take away from this moment is that there are no real consequences for trying to bulldoze democracy. America has faced ambitious autocrats before. It has faced segregation, McCarthyism, Watergate, the Iraq War, lies, the gutting of voting rights. We have stumbled, but we've also at critical moments pulled ourselves back from the brink through collective will. Removing Trump, or at least neutralizing his most destructive impulses, will not be neat, and it will not be immediate. It will look chaotic from up close. It will feel at times like nothing is working. But if this democracy still has a pulse, and I think it does, then every one of these imperfect levers has to be pulled, often by different people, in different places, for different reasons, all at once. Because the alternative is not stability. The alternative is slow collapse. And if there's one thing this era has taught us, it's that collapse doesn't arrive with a single dramatic moment. It arrives through a series of things we decided were no big deal. So the work now is to treat this as the big deal that it is, to recognize that the presidency is not supposed to be a throne, and that the office is always bigger than the person who occupies it. Our job as citizens is not just to comment on that from the sidelines. Our job is to enforce it. This has been America's Fractured Politics. Keep the faith, and remember, this will end.